So this idea of individualism, of like liberalism, of this notion that we're here to maximize personal freedom and autonomy to the extent possible. This is also something that is very much like infused in the education system, not just the education system, but all of modern culture, in the movies, in the music, in the television series, which are now exported all over the world and consumed by everybody, right? One of the most constant messages is you are, you do you. Be yourself, break free from all chains and shackles, like follow your heart. Like it's all about you and me and myself and who am I and what am I all about and what should I be doing and, developing my own, self-realization and all of that. Like, again, to a degree, this is fine. Like, of course, we're not just machines. Like we have personalities. Allah created each of us unique. We have different capabilities, different, things that we can contribute, like, of course. But at the same time, we don't put our own ego on the pedestal, or, we realize that also we exist in cultures and communities and families, and we have duties towards other people. It's not just rights. I'm not here just to maximize my personal freedom. I'm here to actually submit to my creator, right? This idea of like radical freedom. And I don't just mean regular freedom from like political oppression. I mean, this is something that's universal. And of course, as Muslims, we value this as well. But this very radical modern notion of freedom, that I am born to be free of any and all constraints, be they cultural, familial, religious, ethical, whatever. I'm just here to kind of like break out and do my thing. And this rugged individualism, that type of freedom, right? That very radical notion of freedom is something that's very germane to the modern mindset, right? And if you look at Islam, I like to point this out. What does Islam mean? The name of our religion, what is it? What does Islam mean?
Submission.
Yeah,
submission.
Peace is salam. Islam means submission, right? So on the surface of it, that's like diametrically opposed. You have one worldview that's obsessed with freedom, liberation, breaking boundaries, striking out, right? That's very central to the modern worldview. And the other worldview is called submission. Like that's the name of it. Now, it's not submission to a king. It's not submission to, anything, but it's submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we would say that when you submit to Allah, you free yourself from submission to everything else. You're free from your own ego. You're free from your passions and desires. You're free from, social constraints and all of this, because you are submitted. Ideally, you're submitted to just the one who is free of all constraints and all limits. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nevertheless, the kind of psychological motivation of the Muslim, when we wake up in the morning, like stereotypically the modern person wakes up and says, oh, how can I be as free today as possible and kind of like, exercise my personal autonomy and my choice and all of this, right? These are the buzzwords. The Muslim doesn't wake up and say, how can I be as free and autonomous as possible? Let me submit to Allah because that's, where I'll get my freedom. Our goal is, how can I be a better servant and slave of Allah today? How can I be more in submission than I was yesterday? How can I be a better abd, which means slave, which is a word that modern people don't like to hear. Now, it's true that in the submission to Allah, there is a very profound freedom that is gained. That is true. But that freedom also is a byproduct. It's not the reason why we submit, right? We submit for its own sake. Our goal is the submission, and the freedom that comes from that is concomitant to it, right? But psychologically, our goal is not the freedom itself. Our goal is to submit to Allah, right? So this is a very different kind of way. Now, it doesn't mean Muslims love to be slaves and we love oppression, we love tyranny. Of course not. And we're supposed to fight against these things and establish justice and so forth. But I'm just saying, if you view the world as all about me and my personal individual freedom and autonomy and self-realization, and you believe that the goal of human beings is to be radically free in that sense, and that the best human society and the best ethical and moral and legal system is the one that allows the maximum amount of like personal freedom and autonomy, that's a very different notion from the one where you say human beings are here to perfect their virtue. They're here to perfect their inner character. They're here to develop religiously. They're here to live lives that will be successful in this life and the next. And this sometimes requires limitations on freedom. It sometimes requires moral judgments to be made. It requires laws to allow certain things and not allow others based on what's actually true and right, not just what individual egos desire, right? These are very different. But if you take on the modern assumption about individualism and about, this very radical notion of personal autonomy and liberal freedom and so forth, if you take that to be true, or if you take that for granted, which again, many, many, many people do in the modern world because it's so pervasive, again, not just in the educational system, but throughout modern culture, if that is your paradigm, then many aspects of Islam are going to look very confusing to you, or they're going to look unjust. Well, why would Allah forbid this? Or why would the Sharia not allow this? That's encroaching upon my personal freedom or someone else's personal freedom, right? And you're going to start looking at things as being unjust, unjustifiable, arbitrary, oppressive, restrictive, right? But all of that is a perception, right? You only see it that way when you perceive it from the assumption that you are here to realize and experience maximum personal freedom and autonomy. But we don't concede that to begin with. Like, that's not our paradigm, right? And because that's not our paradigm, if you start with a different paradigm, then everything in Sharia makes perfect sense, right? If you start with certain assumptions about the human being, the nature of the human being, why we're here, and also you look at, say, the maqasid of the Sharia, right? The scholars looked at the actual ahkam that Allah has promulgated and said, what are the main things that Allah is trying to preserve for human beings? And they came up with a list of 5 or 6 maqasid: the preservation of religion, the preservation of life, the preservation of property, of lineage, of intellect, and of honor, right? And these are things that are universal goods for all human beings, given our true nature, the way Allah has created us. And so it is in our best interest, individually and collectively, in this life and in the next life, both, right, to preserve these particular things. And if that is your paradigm, right, and you see that, okay, human flourishing is not necessarily to be achieved through the maximum amount of personal freedom and individual autonomy, but rather human flourishing, again, collective and individual, this worldly and otherworldly, is best to be gained through the promotion and preservation of these particular sets of values, right, this scale of values. If that's your starting assumption, right, then everything in Islam will make perfect sense. Because this ruling that the typical modern liberal will say, oh, that's a restriction on personal freedom and it's unjustified, you'll say, no, but hold on, that rule, right, that you think is restrictive, it's actually vital for promoting this particular end. It's vital for protecting religion. It's vital. Why is zina, prohibited, like premarital or non-marital sex, right? Well, because it directly undermines the sanctity of the family and of lineage and of, natural families, parents and children and all of that. And so much of our lives have to do with our families, and so much of our, rights and duties and all of that all go through, like, who are your relatives? This is very, very central. So yes, of course, sexual freedom is restricted, but it's restricted in the service of protecting a very vital value and a very vital, maqsid or intent that is itself vital for human flourishing, right? So there's a very obvious justification for it. And if you understand the maqasid, if you understand the goals of the Sharia, right, and you understand that those are normative because Allah is the one who knows best what is in our best interest, then it'll make perfect sense to you. And you'll say, well, of course, this is the best system, is the one that upholds these particular values, and the Sharia upholds those values, and so that's the best system. And the fact that it might be in somebody else's eyes abrogating personal freedom here or there, well, so be it. Like the point is, like, their starting assumptions are faulty to begin with.